So today we're talking about dead games. Games can die, yes. And we're talking about what could make a dead game. Basically games like people say, "Oh, a dead game means it's not the most popular game in the world." Well, then every game besides League of Legends, Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, you know, and Among Us will all be considered dead games, which is not true. There's still a lot of big games with active player bases. So today we'll talk about dead games. Dying games also are pretty similar. Dying games are games that are losing the player base fast. Current examples of this include Fall Guys, The Last of no Avengers, and NBA 2K21. Don't see those games feasible. Those games aren't really keeping the player base that well. We'll be going over Steam charts. So yeah, Steam, of course, is basically has charts for which games are the most popular in the world. A dead game basically has to have a very low player base. Here. So we go here, and yeah, these games are all not considered dead games. Any games that are the top 10 most played Steam games are not considered dead by any metrics. For example, people call TF2 a dead game, but it currently has 96,000 players, and on the average day has 60,000 players. So you can't call TF2 a dead game. CSGO is also not considered a dead game since it also has 500,000 players daily. All those other similar games like Rainbow Six Siege and PUBG. PUBG is another example of a game that it is slowly dying. This is PUBG's player base. PUBG has slowly died off from its heyday. But again, PUBG is still considered decently popular by the gaming industry. It still has an average players of 169,000. But PUBG is considered one of those games that are slowly dying. And what makes the game truly not die? For example, Team Fortress 2 is one of those games. TF2 actually has a pretty high player base of 96,000 currently. Of course, it'll probably go back down to 60,000. But the fact that people keep coming back to it, what makes the game not die is probably here. So yeah, we have here peak records for games. So we gotta go back, peak records for PUBG. PUBG basically is now dead. Life is Strange 2, that must have been like a, free game. They must have put that out for free, because that's in the peak records of game, because it's pretty odd, to say at least. But again, for example, single player games have a big disadvantage against multiplayer games. Story-based games do, but yeah, the term should really refer to multiplayer games mostly. For example, games like Destiny 2 have actually stayed relatively popular, despite Destiny 2 being quote-unquote dead by the gaming community. So, what makes a dead game? We haven't really answered this question. So yeah, games that are basically losing the player base really fast, like Fall Guys, is considered a dead game. Fall Guys is losing its player base very, very fast, for example. And yeah, we go down here. Games like Risk of Rain 2 are losing the player base. PAS 2020, Sea of Thieves, as well. Mafia Definitive, and multiplayer, and yeah, single player games have basically get worse off because those single player games, once you beat it, you don't really play a single player game anymore unless you want to speed run the game. But a game below 5,000 players on Steam is what's considered a dead game. These are all considered dead games by my book. Because, not many people are playing them. They have really dropped off from the peak player base here. And these games are considered dead games as they have been dying for a while. But they still have an active player base that are still pretty decent. But now let's get to the truly dead games. Truly dead games are under 1,000 players. These are the games that nobody plays on Steam. The same thing will apply to Twitch stats as well and YouTube stats for games. So that's what makes a dead game. For example, Dragon Ball FighterZ has 2,000 players, but the game still has a pretty active and stable player base. This is the player base of Marvel's Avengers. Wow, that's pretty awful there. Marvel's Avengers is a prime example of a dying game. It has a massive peak of players at once, but there's very little reasons for players to go back. And of course, we have another thing. Game, no legs. Yes, games always have rigs. Nintendo games are, of course, the king of these. Nintendo games can never truly, for example, Smash Bros. Ultimate will never truly be dead because of how many people probably are playing it now on the Switch, because of how popular Nintendo's games are and how well it sells every month. Similar to that, many other Switch games that are extremely popular, like Animal Crossing still probably pulls in tens of thousands of players each day. Same thing with Smash Bros. And other games. Those games never die because Nintendo keeps still caring to them. But even then, when the next console dies or the next game, they get subsequently replaced by the next game. And now, super dead games. What are super dead games? Well, super dead games are games that have essentially have hit the bottom tier of games. Games like, of course, Crucible are prime examples of dead games that no one plays. But a game could have a dead player base. But now we're going to go over Legacy. Yes. Yes, a game may be quote unquote dead. But there is something else that could fix a game from being dead. If you just look at games or best games, usually these games that show up, or games that show up, were recommended by critics. Of course, that are of course liked by audiences as well. The Last of Us Part 2 is not here. And yeah, the other things, for example, sales. The Last of Us Part 2 sold extremely poorly after its first weekend, which again goes in two legs. For example, Zelda Breath of the Wild actually outsold The Last of Us Part 2, and The Last of Us Part 2 is below Ori and the Will. It's below that game. I actually don't know what Ori the Will of the Wisps is about. It's also below Skyrim, a 9-year-old game. That's just absolutely laughable, at least, or Minecraft. Minecraft also came out the same year. But yeah, basically, sales is what matters the most, and rigs matter the most, and also reception. When timeless games are different than games that are considered dead. A game could be considered dead, but for example, a game like Ocarina of Time and Mario 64. Yes, they don't really have massive player bases now because not many people really own the N64 anymore, or the Wii releases. But for example, Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time still have active fan bases and still are debated among some of the best games of all time. If you look at the best games according to the top 10s or any best game by the critics rate, you'll always see that the same games show up: Ocarina of Time, Smash Bros, Skyrim. Yeah, basically games that are going to be timeless for the rest of the eternity. Here, this is the list of the best games. Of course, games like Halo 3 that came out 14 years ago only have like 400 to 500 players playing on the Xbox 360, but it's still on this list of greatest games of all time. And for example, Zelda Ocarina of Time is one big game on here. Zelda Ocarina of Time still has a very big community on sites like Twitch and YouTube and other streaming sites because it is considered one of the greatest games of all time. Yes, Ocarina of Time doesn't have the biggest player base in the world, as it's a single-player game, but you can't really say Ocarina of Time is dead because of the amount of accolades it is and how much discussion it is among the best games of all time. And other examples include Breath of the Wild, Mario 64, and many Nintendo games actually come up for this discussion. Other games also come up for discussion, but they still have pretty big, massive player bases, such as Skyrim and Minecraft still have very big, massive player bases. GTA 5, Skyrim, and Minecraft still have pretty big player bases out of this top 10. And also Red Dead Redemption is also here, but that's another single player game. And I don't really see many people talk about Red Dead Redemption anymore because it's a sequel. And again, that's also another problem a game might have to overcome: sequels. Of course, inevitably a successful game is going to get a sequel. For example, Ocarina of Time, despite the numerous Zelda sequels, never will don't know those games until Breath of the Wild really could top Ocarina of Time and contend against Ocarina of Time. Mario has had an even bigger problem with this. The first Mario game, very revolutionary. Then Mario World came out, then Mario 64, then Mario Galaxy, even though I don't really care for Mario Galaxy that much, and then Mario Odyssey. All those games are fighting over the best Mario game and which one is considered the best. Same problem is with Smash Bros. It's where this game could top Melee. And again, a simple factor to this issue is Melee and Smash Bros. And GTA. GTA was really, the GTA games between GTA 5 and San Andreas. That's why people are still buying GTA 5, by the way, is because, yeah, it's the only game that could really contend because it has online. Same thing on Smash Bros. Ultimate. It has all of these characters that people have been wanting for years and everything that people have been wanting versus Melee, an old GameCube game as well. And yeah, Halo has had this before too, Halo 1 or Halo 2 or Halo 3 as well. Yeah, none of these new Halo games can really live up to the first three. It will always be like that. We don't know about Halo Infinite, but yeah. But then sometimes a sequel will be way worse than the original. For example, The Last of Us Part 2. Oh yes, that game exists. The Last of Us is definitely way better than its sequel. Way better. If you look at the top 100 games according to this list, you'll probably not see the sequel to The Last of Us anywhere. The same thing could be applied to Mass Effect 2 and 3, Halo 3 and 4 as well, as sequels sometimes will stink and not be as great as the other games in the franchise. Fallout 4 to Fallout 76, as well as Chrono Trigger to Chrono Cross, and Star Wars Battlefront to the EA Star Wars Battlefronts, because the EA ones are not that great. And yeah, it's the same thing could apply to many franchises as a whole. Yes, the first game might be great, but its sequel sure does suck. Or just at least underwhelming compared to the first game. And the biggest example of that is The Last of Us out of all 50 games here. Yeah, and Paper Mario, but that's sticker style 2 games later. The only other game that would be similar to this is Resident Evil 5, will disappoint a lot of Resident Evil fans of straying away from the horror aspect, and basically Resident Evil 4 that balanced out the horror and non-horror aspects, respectively, giving it the biggest audience, while Resident Evil 5 and 6 were basically just straight up Call of Duty, or really just trying to ride out the coattails of Call of Duty. But yeah, I think out of all these 50 games, Resident Evil 4 and Last of Us both had sequels that basically underwhelmed everybody. And yeah, when we look at games here, more of the games here, also, yeah, I could go over here, more games that had pretty bad sequels that nobody likes. Sonic Generations never got a true sequel in any form. The game after that did underwhelm the Sonic fanbase because it was released on the Wii U, Sonic Lost World. But again, that's on the Wii U, so. And yeah, okay, what was it? Infinite, Banjo-Kazooie, of course. I'm surprised it's not higher because of nostalgia, but again, yeah, Fallout is another, and another big one's Fallout. Yeah, and yeah, we're gonna go over here. Oh yeah, Pac-Man as Go got a sequel that was really bad, Pac-Man 2. It wasn't even Pac-Man. It was basically Pac-Man walking around the city and doing stuff in the city. So yeah, there we go. That is the some of these games that don't make any sense are Clash of Clans. But yep, that is so. What have we learned? What makes a dead game? It isn't considered one of the best games of all time by any critics or any audience at all. Nobody cares about it, so why should it be on here? It doesn't have an active player base on Steam over 5,000 players. It also doesn't have an active viewer base on Twitch. And there we go. That's what you get to a dead game. A dead game is never really remembered by anybody. The critics or audiences won't really recommend it to newer people because nobody would care about it. The game in itself is mediocre at best. And no one would want to go for the pain of playing it. So, for example, Ocarina of Time, we already used that example. Ocarina of Time may not have the best player base today, but still has lots of accolades about it. And other popular games also have very big active player bases, which also boosts the game's popularity and ups the game's list on the best player games of all time. And yes, for example, again, Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time are the best. So basically a dead game is games that just don't age well. That's basically what it should be. Games that just don't age well, basically. For example, Marvel's Avengers basically died. Fall Guys is dying. No one's gonna really remember Fall Guys in 2 years. FNAF died. The FNAF, Fall Guys are examples of dead or dying games as well. So yep, there we go. That and again, these games must have an active user base on YouTube. There isn't a small niche audience. For example, Zelda games and Mario games are still very popular among Nintendo YouTubers, and Pokemon still has a pretty big, they even have a term for it, PokeTuber on YouTube. And Smash Bros, that's complicated. That's basically it. Goodbye.